There's something fascinating about the crossovers that slip past fans' collective memory. Take for instance the Superman the Animated Series episode, The Demon Reborn, an episode that a lot of people seem to overlook despite being a Batman crossover story. Sure, it lacks the spectacle of World's Finest and the irresistible novelty of nighttime, but it's still an essential step on the road to the Justice League. The episode exists in a strange little corner of the DC animated universe, the final team-up that I almost never see anyone talk about. Which is kind of baffling, especially considering how I think this episode at least partially inspired DC's Absolute Superman, where an alternate reality version of the Man of Steel tries to save Earth from Ra's al Ghul. Even if that isn't the case and it's just a coincidence, I believe that the Demon Reborn offers far more than its reputation suggests. By keeping Batman and Superman apart for much of the episode, the story leans into its thematic threads. Ra's and Talia's plundering of sacred artifacts from Native Americans, the shadow of Ra's colonial past resurfacing in the present, and the unsettling idea of ancient power structures treating living cultures as ingredients for their own survival. It's less about the thrill of seeing two icons share the screen and more about the frictions that arise when their worlds brush against each other. Swapping villains forces the heroes out of their comfort zones. Batman knows Ra's inside and out, but for Superman, both Ra's and Talia present threats he's never faced before. So in that sense, the episode becomes unexpectedly rich, even if many viewers never stop to notice. Perhaps a partial explanation for this is how the episode deliberately separates Batman and Superman from most of the story, which might undercut the novelty of the crossover, but I argue that it creates a more character-driven send-off. It doesn't have to rely on the spectacle of just seeing Batman and Superman fighting crime together, although it does have a little of that, partly because of the concept of diminishing returns. Their very first crossover was a 3-part epic that saw Batman and Superman start off as hostile, but learn to work together against a massive threat. Nighttime had the novelty of Superman literally inhabiting Batman's role to protect Gotham. As such, the Demon Reborn needed to bring something new to the table, and I'd argue that it does, as Ra's al Ghul seeps into Metropolis. The core premise of this episode is that Ra's al Ghul's Lazarus pits can no longer sustain him and he is at death's door. In order to continue extending his life, he plans to use a mystical Native American artifact to drain power from Superman and give it to himself, a bit like the Parasite. Ra's has always presented himself as the saviour of the planet Earth. With his unnaturally long life, he has seen firsthand how humanity has abused the planet, polluting its waters, devastating the land, and fouling the air. He claims to be the only one that can restore the natural order, usually through genocide, but really, he's a colossal hypocrite. Ra's is described as a criminal mastermind, more dangerous than the Joker and Lex Luthor combined, and in many ways he is probably the most dangerous person on the planet. Through his life he has amassed a vast fortune and he dedicates his time and money towards his idea of saving the planet. But Ra's is always at his most interesting when the mask of a saviour slips, when the carefully curated image of an eco-messiah starts to look more like a man who simply enjoys being the one in charge. The Demon Reborn gives you a perfect glimpse behind the mask, because the episode casually drops a detail that exposes the entire mythology he's built around himself. Ra's amassed much of his fortune by conquering a Native American civilization, a civilization that actually embodied the balance he claims to defend. It's a stunning contradiction. Ra's has spent centuries preaching about humanity's duty to the planet, positioning himself as the lone sage who sees the world clearly. Yet when he arrived in the New World, he sided with the invading force, the people tearing through the land with steel, guns, and the early seeds of industrial pollution. He didn't preserve the native people that lived in harmony with the earth, he profited from their destruction. Their spiritual traditions and sustainable practices were an inconvenience, not a model. And now in the present he sends his lackeys to steal a sacred artifact from the same lineage and twists it into a tool for his own immortality. The Shaman staff that he seeks isn't the most valuable item there, but it is reported to have mystical healing properties. It's important to note that the cargo train heading for Metropolis was filled with irreplaceable cultural wonders, and Ra's ninjas just threw them around with no regard for their historical significance. This is where the episode clearly shows us who Ra's is. He isn't an environmentalist, not really. He's a supremacist with a green coat of paint. Protecting the Earth is only noble to him when he is the steward and when his vision is the one being imposed. The moment a people or culture achieves the harmony he claims to want, but does so without his hand on the reins, he becomes their conqueror, not their ally. And that hypocrisy reframes his entire philosophy. For all his talk of balance, Raish is always on the side of the Empire so long as it keeps him immortal, wealthy, and in control. In short, Raish is the archetype for the colonizer who never stopped taking, and this time he's taking from a marginalized culture as well as from Superman's body, all because he is afraid of dying. His fear of death is the engine driving every choice he makes. The Lazarus pits have stopped working, his body is collapsing, and the centuries of control he's enjoyed are slipping through his fingers. Raish has a perfectly capable heir in his daughter Talia, who literally captures Superman single-handedly, risking her life by pretending to be Lois Lane in danger, and while he may hide behind a chauvinistic desire for a son to carry on his legacy, we all know that he'd never cede control to anyone. This is perfectly demonstrated later on in the time of Batman Beyond, where he attempts to seize control of Bruce Wayne's body. But that's a topic I covered extensively in my video about Talia al Ghul, which I have linked to in the info button in the top right corner, so add that to your watch later list if the subject interests you. For someone who's built his entire identity on superiority and being the one ancient constant in a world that keeps changing, the prospect of fading away is unbearable to Raish. He treats mortality as something that is beneath him and should make way for someone with his supposed vision. His decision to steal a sacred artifact, kidnap Superman and siphon the strength from someone that regularly saved the planet doesn't feel like the crusade of a noble hero. It feels like the flailing of a man who knows he's losing the game and refuses to leave the table. What's particularly telling is how he reacts when his body actually dies. Okay, sure, he was only dead for a few moments before the power of the Shaman staff brought him back, but what he does next is revealing. He awakens with a renewed thirst for power. He's not grateful or even happy. Instead, he's pumped full of stolen life and immediately starts throwing his weight around, desperate to reassert dominance. When Talia suggests that he might have had enough, he declares that he wants every ounce of Superman's power, and this is where the contrast with Superman works beautifully. Superman's power is rooted in service. Raish wants power only to avoid an ending. Superman embraces life. Raish clings to it like a miser hoarding coins. The episode uses their confrontation to expose the hollow core of Raish's philosophy. In the end, all his grand ideas collapse into a simple, desperate truth. He cannot imagine a world that continues without him, and he will tear apart anything sacred, ancient, or living if it buys him one more heartbeat. Of course, there's more to this episode than just being a showcase of Ra's al Ghul's villainy. I had mentioned earlier how Talia had impersonated Lois Lane to capture Superman, and when the real Lois comes to, confused and afraid, she's met by Batman. This moment is an absolute gem for both Lois and Batman. Batman came to Lois's apartment not just out of concern for her, but to look for clues and advance the investigation. But the second Lois wakes up and recognises him, the whole scene shifts. It becomes a tiny epilogue to World's Finest, where Lois had called off her relationship with Bruce Wayne after she learned that he was Batman. In this scene, she admits she had second thoughts about ending things, says that she considered calling him, and asks if he felt the same way. It's one of the few times we see Lois Lane, usually so unshakable, let a crack show. And then we get the punchline that only Batman can deliver. She turns around mid-sentence, and he's gone. It's funny, yes, but it's also thematically loaded. Batman can take on an army of assassins without blinking, but intimacy? That's the cliff he rarely approaches. The scene says everything about who he is and who he isn't. He'll show up to help her, to keep her safe, and do detective work to solve the mystery, but he cannot face emotional vulnerability. It's precisely the type of detail that makes the Demon Reborn worth revisiting. The episode may not be the blockbuster of the Batman-Superman collaborations, but it's so revealing. We see Lois's insecurities, Raish's hypocrisy, and Batman's discomfort. Even though Batman swoops in to save the day, twice, he's not the powerhouse of the episode. He's no match for Raish's new powers. In fact, even Superman in his weakened state doesn't get to showcase his powers all that much. Instead, he borrows a tactic from the villain's playbook, but with a profound difference in intent. Earlier, he had been forced to let Talia escape after she blew up a bridge and disabled the train's brakes, threatening to cause the train to crash and cause countless casualties. Talia asked him to decide between saving the people and catching her. At the episode's conclusion, Superman shatters the Shaman's staff and forces Raish into a choice: punish him or save his daughter's life. Superman has faith that, for as drunk on power as Raish is, his instincts as a father will win out. Raish chooses Talia, and in that moment, the centuries of scheming, cunning, and ruthless planning are revealed to be powerless against the one thing he cannot master: his own attachment. Superman's tactic was to expose the emotional fault lines that even the most formidable villains carry with them. In other words, Raish may be immortal, but he is still human. Unfortunately, he was too late to rescue Talia as the two tumble over the cliff's edge and into an underground river. The episode ends with Batman and Superman walking into the sunrise as Superman points out what a successful team they are, and it might be worth making it a recurring thing, to which Batman scoffs. A very funny tease for the eventual Justice League series, I'm sure you will all agree. The Demon Reborn may not have the spectacle of World's Finest. There's no Lex Luthor or Joker causing citywide chaos. And unlike Nighttime, there's no clever gimmick to hang the marketing on. Superman doesn't cosplay as Batman. So at first glance it's easy to see why the episode slipped under the radar for many viewers. But its very restraint is where the episode's power lies. Tonally, it feels closer to a late-era Batman the Animated Series Ra's al Ghul story than a typical Superman adventure. It's mythic, serious, and almost feels like an elegy. The heroes are apart for long stretches, and the plot moves with a meditative weight rather than the urgency of spectacle. And these are precisely the qualities that make the Demon Reborn memorable. The subtle emotional stakes, the moral reckonings, and the human vulnerability of characters like Ra's and Talia creates a crossover that flies under the radar. Its fading from immediate memory only underscores its understated brilliance. This is a story built for reflection rather than immediate thrill, which helps cement it as a rare and resonant final chapter for Batman and Superman before the expansion of the DC animated universe. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my channel members. Everyone who was a member at the time of this video's creation is listed on the screen right now. If you want to see your name amongst all these wonderful people, join the channel now. Next time, I'll be back on Friday to talk about the winner of my most recent The Batman villain poll, that version's goth take on the Prince of Puzzles, the Riddler. And next Monday we'll see the first of my 4 festive specials on Mr. Freeze. First up, the episode that didn't just give a forgotten villain new layers, it also defined Batman for a generation. I'll be talking about Heart of Ice. Hope to see you then.